My game of the day from round 9 of Wijk aan Zee 2016 is Wei Yi against David Navara. So Wei Yi, the 16-year-old Chinese superstar, has had a solid tournament up to this point. David Navara, well, a few more ups and downs, but we know he's capable of playing some great chess. Today Navara played knight f6, hitting the pawn on e4. So the Berlin defence, we haven't seen too many of these in Wijk aan Zee 2016. Wei Yi declined the endgame, but instead played d3, establishing this solid core. Keeps more tension in the position. And then he went for this line taking on c6. You certainly don't have to play like this. But it's been favoured by a compatriot of Wei Yi's, Yi, who's used this quite successfully, and Viswanathan Anand has also used this with white as well. The idea is that you have this strong core, this pawn chain, and then white's pieces manoeuvre around it, sometimes on the queen side, sometimes on the king side. So knight c4. There you go, that strong pawn chain there, I've highlighted again. So the e-pawn is attacked, and knight d7. So this is a very standard position actually. And here, well, Anand and others favour castling kingside. I should also, let me just point out that, of course, white cannot capture on e5 because of queen d4, hitting two loose points. But here, Wei Yi played in a slightly different way. He didn't castle kingside, he played queen e2. Now, it's quite clear that white, with this move, is thinking of castling queenside, so a more aggressive or overtly aggressive approach. Rook e8, good move, defending the e-pawn and preparing perhaps to move the knight back to f8, sometimes the bishop back to f8. Bishop d2, so there we go, preparing queenside casting. Bishop d6, so reinforcing the e-pawn and preparing to maneuver the knight, sometimes to c5, sometimes to f8, sometimes, as we'll see, even to b8. But this knight clearly needs to move, and it would very much like to get to this square, actually, e6. That's the dream square, looking at these important squares in the position. Now, previously in this position, this has been played a few times, and white has gone with g4. But instead, Wei Yi played h4, and he said after the game, "This is my new move." But the curious thing was, he played this and realised this had also been played on another board in the tournament in exactly the same round. Caruana had also prepared this move and played it against Sergei Karyakin. It's funny how some ideas obviously are floating in the air, just ready to be played. In this position, Karyakin, well, he has a pretty good sense of danger, and he played knight f8 and brought round the knight to e6 to this excellent square straight away. And, well, this is a very long, complicated game with the advantage switching sides. But I think, just talking about this position, I think Karyakin is doing reasonably well. Of course, it's a big decision. Do you allow this pawn to advance one square further? You know, you could argue that with this move, white is able to, weaken black's king position. Caruana didn't go for that, but it's a very tricky defensive decision. Anyway, back to our game, Wei Yi against Navara. Here, Navara chose c5, which in principle is a move that black would like to play. Just clamping this d4 square, and when the knight arrives at e6, then it's more likely to hop in there basically, and also prepares perhaps to storm here. It just gives black more room. So c5 is in principle it's okay. h5, and here it's that big dilemma that black faces. How far do you allow that pawn to advance? Do you let it go one square further, or do you blockade? Navara decided to blockade. He thinks he can shut out white completely, so for example, g4, f6 in this position. But Wei Yi didn't commit himself. He played castles queenside after a very long think, actually. And here I think the safest for black is to play knight f8. Obviously white can't play g4 for the moment because the bishop is attacking that. But it is possible perhaps to maneuver around with the knight to h4, and perhaps to bring the knight here to e3, and perhaps throw a knight into f5, so that you don't have to storm the king straight away in this line. Anyway, knight f8 not played. I think that would be the safest. Navara played knight b8. Now, this is a much more ambitious move, actually, because the knight still wants to come to c6 and perhaps later on to d4, but he's leaving the e6 square available. So, obviously he doesn't want a traffic jam if a knight has gone to f8. Doesn't want the knight to be treading on the bishop's toes. So if he can play knight c6, bishop e6, maybe preface that with f6, then that is a very harmonious setup for black, and perhaps he can look to start attacking on the queen side with b5. But there is a drawback. It is, of course, pretty slow. And after knight c6, Wei Yi started attacking straight away with g4, this very crude attacking idea. Of course, if he can break through with g5, crack open the g-file, that would be tremendous for white. But Navara thought he had it under control. He played f6, which appears to block out white. And then, as I said, he wants to play bishop e6 and b5 and so on. But Wei Yi crashed through anyway. He played g5. Well, this has to be captured. And then knight takes. So the Chinese player is offering a piece just to break open the g-file, just to open a file against black's king. Navara threw in knight d4, attacking the queen, and the queen steps back. Okay, that seems reasonable for black to do that. Now, black does not have to take this piece, but if b5, for example, then the knight can just retreat, and white simply has a very strong attack against g7. But also that e5 pawn is isolated, and that can come under fire later on, perhaps, with this bishop. So even if you don't accept the sacrifice, it's pretty bad. Okay, but Navara took it. Bishop takes g5. Now, I've highlighted the relevant pieces in this position. You can see that every single one of white's pieces contributes to the attack. But look at black's rook and bishop that just haven't come into play yet. White, just by logic, should have a winning attack here, just by sheer weight of numbers. The bishop blocked with bishop e7, and now bishop h6. Well, white has to play some careful moves here. If bishop h6, then actually king h7 is a very good move, and incredibly black has some kind of defense there. But bishop e3 is a very subtle move, very cool move, and a very strong move. And here, well, let's see what happens if black tries to bring some pieces over. Let's say bishop e6. So we're going to discover just how dangerous white's attack is. White plays h6. Let's throw in another check. Then you play knight takes e5. And, I mean, this just looks absolutely crushing once the knight joins in the attack. In the game, Navara played bishop f6 to reinforce g7. h6 came. And now here's a nice variation. What happens if black attempts to keep the g-file closed? Well, I mean, queen h5 is a good move, but the most spectacular is bishop takes g5. And if this is taken, and here's a great idea, f4. With this move, white gains time. So obviously the bishop can't take, there's a pin. So pawn takes pawn, and now queen h5. Threatening rook takes bishop, and if knight e6, then you take anyway. It's a beautiful idea. So knight takes allows queen g6 and queen g7 mate, and if queen takes, okay, that pawn blocks the check, that's important. Now you can take on e8, but h7 is even better. And that is absolutely decisive. Don't forget that rook can be taken. King h8, queen takes rook. Okay, back to the game. h6 has just been played. So Navara reinforced g7 with rook e7. Of course, the g file was cracked open, and then queen h5. Now, this is pretty clockwork from now on. I mean, it's just impossible to defend. Queen h8 followed by rook g7 and queen takes d8 is already a threat. So bishop e6. Well, let's look at a couple of other variations. What about rook takes g1? Let's see this. Rook g1 and then simply knight e5, threatening a mate. And if this is taken, queen h8 is threatened. Well, I mean, this is no surprise that with these pieces playing against black's bare king, obviously this is going to be winning. And even if the rook is taken, then queen h8 followed by bishop g5 is winning for white. What else we got? Queen e7, let's try this one. Bishop h6, and this is pretty bad. After the game, Wei Yi said he was going to take on e5 here, but maybe it's even better to do this and play f4. And if this is taken, then e5, and you can see that that bishop is actually trapped. I mean, it's just a tidal wave that sweeps over black's position. You know, it's just straightforward for white pieces. In the game, bishop e6 was played, and you can check on h8 here, but Wei Yi played bishop h6, and this is very straightforward and actually very nice. Bishop takes rook, you give up the queen temporarily. Bishop takes bishop, that's a discovered check, and black tries to recover material. This is what happened in the game, and in this position Navara resigned. Material is even for the moment, but two black pieces are attacked, as well as that e-pawn, and black just loses material, so Navara resigned. Well, just a brilliant attacking game from Wei Yi. You might recall his game against Bruzon in this last year, I think played in the Capablanca Memorial, where Wei Yi blasted through on the king side in a shavening, and there was this incredible king march up the board, and Wei Yi just played a brilliant attacking game, worth checking out. So after that, Wei Yi brings himself up to 5 points out of 9. There are 4 players on 5. Wesley So, Wei Yi, Anish Giri and Ding Liren on 5 out of 9. Then Caruana on 5.5. He only drew against Karyakin. And then a point clear, Carlsen with 6.5. He defeated Michael Adams in quite a long game. Pairings for round 10, Caruana plays Wei Yi and Giri plays against Carlsen. Very interesting pairings. Thanks for watching.